In a small town in Germany on October 15, 1844, a boy was born destined to challenge gods, philosophers, and kings, Friedrich Nietzsche. Son and grandson of Lutheran pastors, he grew up surrounded by faith, duty, and morality. But inside him, from an early age, something began to fracture. There was a silent restlessness that would accompany him throughout his life, the feeling that the world was not what it seemed. While others saw certainties, he saw cracks. While others sought answers, he learned to distrust the questions. By the age of 24, Nietzsche was already a professor at a prestigious university, a prodigy of classical thought. But something within him rebelled against the comfort of academia. He could not bear the routine, the intellectual masks, the hypocrisy of a world that spoke of truth without daring to face it. And one day, he simply left. He abandoned everything, his position, his security, his prestige. He withdrew into silence, into isolation. There, among the mountains, with the wind as his only witness, he began to write the ideas that would change the course of human thought. Nietzsche did not write from cold reason, but from the open wound of existence. For him, philosophy was not an intellectual exercise, it was a way of surviving. Every word was a struggle against the void, a rebellion against the gods and against himself. God is dead, and we have killed him, he wrote. But that phrase was not a celebration. It was a warning, because when God dies, certainties, values, and meaning die too. And what remains is an abyss. Nietzsche was that man who peered into the abyss and did not look away. While the world sought security in morality, he sought truth in chaos. While the majority tried to obey, he dared to create. He was a solitary, rejected, misunderstood thinker. His work, ignored in life, would later become one of the most powerful intellectual explosions in history. In his isolation, Nietzsche began to understand something few can accept, that suffering is not a flaw of life, but its most honest language, that every loss, every failure, every pain is a form of learning. But to hear what life is trying to tell you, one must have the courage to face it without masks. This was the awakening of the rebellious thinker, a man who decided to look at the universe without fear, even knowing it could cost him his sanity. For Nietzsche, life should not be measured by ideals or future rewards, but by the pure experience of the present, not by what it promises, but by what it is. In an era when everything was valued by its usefulness or morality, Nietzsche dared to say something radical. Life does not need justification. It is not here to serve a divine purpose, nor to fulfill a list of virtues invented by others. Life, he said, is its own end, and only those who can love it, even in its cruelty, have truly learned to live. In his solitude, Nietzsche began to notice a silent trap dominating people, the cult of idols. Not idols of stone, but of the mind. Ideals, dogmas, moral rules, systems of thought that enslave human experience under the weight of right and good. To him, civilization had learned to suppress the most vital aspects, instincts, passions, emotions. Everything that connects us to life had been chained in the name of reason and morality. His critique was brutal. Your values, he said, are nothing but masks of fear. Nietzsche saw that humanity hid behind morality to avoid facing its own shadow. We prefer to obey rather than think, to follow rather than feel, to feign goodness rather than confront our darkness. But he believed that only those who face their own chaos can truly transform. And this, for him, was the highest task of the human being, to create meaning where none exists. In that dark mirror that is existence, Nietzsche saw the truth many cannot bear. There is no universal good, no absolute morality, no perfect life. Everything we consider solid is built on shifting sands, and though this may seem terrifying, it is, in fact, liberating. Because if nothing is predetermined, then everything can be created. If there is no fixed destiny, we are free to invent ourselves. Nihilism, a word so closely associated with Nietzsche, was not for him an invitation to the void, but an opportunity. The destruction of old values opened space for a new type of human, one who submits to nothing, neither gods nor rules, but becomes their own creator. The Übermensch, the overman, is not someone with physical power or wealth, but one who has the courage to affirm life even in the midst of pain, transforming loss into strength, suffering into wisdom. Nietzsche did not just look into the abyss, he reflected in it, and he saw that the abyss was not the end, but the beginning. He understood that within every human being lies a chaos waiting to be transformed into a dancing star. But few have the courage to look inside and not flee. Few accept the truth that meaning is not found. It is created. Imagine this. One night, while you sleep, a demon approaches your ear and whispers, "This life you are living, you will live again and again for all eternity. Every pain, every joy, every moment identical, repeated endlessly." Would that idea horrify you? Or would you embrace it with love? This was the question Nietzsche posed to the world, with his most enigmatic and powerful concept, eternal recurrence. It was not a physical theory nor a superstition. It was, in reality, a measure of value, a moral mirror, a brutal way of asking if you are truly living the life you desire. Because if your answer to this possibility is yes, if you do not fear repeating it infinitely, then you have understood what it means to love existence. But if the idea frightens you, perhaps you are not living in harmony with yourself. Nietzsche did not seek comfort. He did not wish to promise a heaven or future redemption. He wanted humans to take responsibility for every act. If everything repeats eternally, every decision gains immense weight. There are no second chances, no escape. Every gesture, every word, every silence is part of a cycle that returns again and again. And only those who can say yes to all that has been lived, even to pain, have transcended the condemnation of existence. Eternal recurrence is, in a sense, life's revenge against weak thinking. It is the question that strips away all excuses, all waiting. Because when you wish something to end, it is because you have not yet learned to love it. Nietzsche challenges us to look even at our tragedies and say, let it return. Not because we are masochists, but because we understand that everything, even what hurts, is part of the sacred fabric of being. For Nietzsche, the good life is not one without suffering, but one that can be affirmed in its entirety. Amor fati, the love of fate, is the battle cry of the strong spirit. To love the inevitable, to love even what you did not choose, to love what was and what will be. Because every moment, even the hardest, is part of the miracle of existence. And yet, loving life is not easy. It requires a courage few possess, the courage not to flee the present, not to live expecting a future to save us. Nietzsche knew that suffering arises from rejecting the now. When we wish things were different, we deny the only reality we have. Eternal recurrence is not a punishment, but an invitation. Live in such a way that you would want to repeat it all, exactly as it is for all eternity. That idea, so simple and yet so devastating, destroys any illusion of control. It leaves us naked before the essential. It forces us to see our lives without masks, to ask ourselves, am I living in a way I would love to repeat everything? If the answer is no, perhaps it is time to truly begin living. From childhood, Nietzsche was raised in a religious environment. Son and grandson of Lutheran pastors, he seemed destined to follow the path of faith. But young Friedrich soon realized something that tore him apart inside. The truths he had been taught could not withstand the weight of reality. Suffering, injustice, the chaos of the world did not fit with the idea of a just God. It was then that he launched one of the most misunderstood and powerful phrases in all philosophy. God is dead, and we have killed him. It was not a celebration of atheism as many thought. It was a warning. With God's death, man was left alone. Without a supreme truth to guide him, he had to invent his own values. And that freedom, though glorious, was also a burden. Humanity, accustomed to obedience, did not know what to do with its own sovereignty. It sought new idols, progress, morality, science, money. And thus, though God had died, the spirit of submission remained alive. Nietzsche saw that traditional morality was not a path to goodness, but a tool of control. Those unable to bear their inner strength preferred to dominate others through guilt and fear. They called virtue weakness and sin the affirmation of desire. For him, herd morality had turned men into domesticated animals, incapable of independent thought. His rebellion was not against ethics, but against the hypocrisy of imposed morality. He believed that every individual must create their own code, born from experience, pain, and authenticity. There are no moral facts, he wrote, only interpretations. In that phrase lies his most radical vision. Morality is not a universal truth, but a human invention, a desperate attempt to impose order on the chaos of existence. Nietzsche distinguished between two types of beings, those who act from active strength and those who live from reactive strength. The former create, transform, affirm life. The latter only react, condemn, repress what they do not understand. The former say yes to life, even to pain. The latter say no to everything that scares them. And according to Nietzsche, much of human history is the triumph of the weak over the strong, the moral slaves over the free spirits. But his message was not an apology for selfishness. It was a call to courage, to live without hiding in systems, without concealing oneself behind what is right. Nietzsche did not want a world without values, but a world where each person creates their own, where good and evil cease to be prisons and become expressions of individual will. And here is where his thought becomes unbearable to many, because it forces us to take full responsibility for our existence.
There is no one else to blame.
There is no destiny other than the one we build ourselves. That absolute freedom, so desired in theory, is in practice. A burden that can destroy even the strongest. Accepting the shadow is not surrendering to it. It is not about justifying our darkest impulses, but recognizing their existence and purpose. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And this phrase sums up the heart of all Nietzsche's thought. Only when we stop fleeing from what we are can we begin to transform it. Repressing the shadow only strengthens it, and the more we deny it, the more power it has over our decisions, our relationships, and our emotional life. Integrating the shadow begins with an act of courage, looking at yourself without filters. Not the self you show on social media, nor the one trying to please everyone, but the one who screams silently when no one sees. The one who feels envy, resentment, desire, or fear. When you dare to observe it without judgment, something changes. You cease to be a slave to what you deny. You begin to see recurring patterns in your relationships, disproportionate reactions, or automatic thoughts you once believed inevitable. You understand that all of this is not the enemy, but the soul's language asking to be heard. Jung saw in the shadow a source of creative and spiritual energy. By integrating it, the individual stops dividing their soul between what can be shown and what must be hidden. This inner union generates a sense of authenticity that the modern world has almost forgotten. The mask falls, and behind it emerges something more genuine, the totality of the human being. Because only those who recognize their darkness can consciously choose to walk toward the light. Otherwise, one lives at the mercy of unconscious drives, acting without knowing why, blaming others for battles that only exist within themselves. Accepting the shadow also transforms the way we see others. When you understand that everyone carries their own darkness, you stop judging so harshly. Empathy and compassion arise. You discover that the flaws that bother you most in others are often the same ones you cannot tolerate in yourself. That deep understanding breaks the cycle of hate and projection, opening space for more real and human relationships. Jung believed this step not only frees the individual but also heals society, because a humanity that knows itself no longer fears its own reflection. The darkest secret of the human mind is not the shadow itself, but our denial of it. Fear of facing what we are keeps us trapped in a fragmented life. But when we gather our parts, when we stop fleeing, darkness ceases to terrify.
It becomes a teacher.
And at that point, the human being stops being a victim of their abysses and becomes their architect. True awakening begins when finally we have the courage to look within and say, "This too am I." Everything we deny about ourselves does not disappear. It only waits patiently for the moment to manifest. That is the true dark secret of the human mind. We believe we are masters of our lives, but in reality, we are governed by what we do not acknowledge. Carl Jung warned us that if we do not make our shadow conscious, it will lead our existence and we will call it destiny. The journey to oneself is not a luminous adventure, but a descent, a necessary descent, because only those who have walked among their own monsters truly know what peace is. Darkness is not here to destroy you, but to remind you of what you have yet to understand. So, the next time you find yourself repeating the same mistakes, feeling the same rage, or running from yourself,
Stop, it is not punishment.
it is your mind asking you to look, to reconcile, to remember, because when you accept your shadow, the world ceases to be a threat. You become free. And perhaps, for the first time, you begin to live not as the character you pretend to be, but as the complete being you have always been.